Thank you for joining me. This is the Bold Lines podcast, and I am your host, Travis Thompson. Today, we're going to be talking about the difference between being functional and fulfilled. In mental health treatment, there can be some diverging ideas of what the purpose is. For some people, they come to therapy with the hope of feeling better and moving forward with their lives. Some people come to therapy to see what they can get away with or what small changes they can make to get others off their backs. Some people actually come to therapy to understand why they do what they do and to change the direction of their lives in a drastic way. No matter which direction someone comes from, they can find some element of benefit in therapy. Now, granted, that's from a therapist that can actually help them and is competent, but let's just assume that most therapists are, at least for this episode. In mental health treatment, there can be some positive things seen overall, and there can also be some concerns. The first thing I'll say is that therapy should not be a way to just alleviate someone's symptomology. In some ways, alleviating symptoms is a great idea. The most common one that people want to be relieved from is suicidal ideation. Of course, people want to feel less of that. That's a great thing. Something like overwhelming anxiety or depression. Too much of that, not a great thing. My second point of mental health treatment that should be looked at and balancing between functional and fulfilled is anxiety and depression itself. Anxiety and depression can actually be good things. You need that. If someone comes into treatment to alleviate the symptom of anxiety, they might not actually need that to go away. Anxiety can tell you that something's wrong. Depression can tell you that you deeply cared about something and now it's lost. Here's the thing. Once you get those symptoms resolved, do you feel as if therapy is over? A lot of people do. They say that, well, I go to therapy to help me with this thought or with this feeling. Well, once it goes away, is therapy over? Are you done? Is there nothing else to work on? What about how we got there? I will say, though, before parsing out the difference between being functional and fulfilled, there's one huge mitigating factor in all of this, and that is insurance. See, here's the thing with insurance is that you can get approved for therapy once you have an identified diagnosis. And so therapy gets justified through an insurance lens on the alleviation of symptoms because it's measurable, at least to some degree. You can't often get insurance approval to be fulfilled in your life. You can do it to be functional and sure that serves a purpose, but it's not really the long-term change we're going to be talking about today. Let me tell you some other things people expect out of treatment, and then we'll figure out what differences we see in being functional and fulfilled. One, people come to therapy to feel better. Great thing. They come for that symptom reduction. Sometimes they also come to understand patterns in their lives. They want to see how they got to where they are. They also want to be able to understand their issues and how to not be bothered by them anymore. Now, I say bothered on purpose because some people do come to therapy not to change their issues, but to move away from the negative feelings around them. This is really popular in a lot of postmodern psychology. And therapy is, I want to come to therapy to feel less bad about things. I don't actually want to change a whole lot. I just want to feel less bad about it. Now, I'm not going to speak about all of this like some boogeyman out in the distance I can shake my fist at, but you got to be honest. If you're someone who knows therapy or talks to people in therapy, this is a common issue. You show up to therapy and I just want to feel less bothered. It's everyone else's fault. It can't be my fault. Even though everyone around me is crazy, I can't be the common denominator. All right, ranting aside, at least for now. So let's talk about the difference between being functional and fulfilled. Being functional focuses mainly on a problem at hand. In therapy, that looks like putting out fires. If someone comes to me and says, I'm unable to do X, one of the first things that I do as a therapist is help the person sort through why they're unable to do it. What is holding them back? What are strategies or ways that they can use to slow down? Now, I don't just do that, although there certainly is benefit. You can't talk about some greater sense of being or purpose when a person can barely make it through the day. Those two things just don't work together. However, just putting out fires creates problems. What happens if the fuel is somewhere else? Hey, you got the insurance approval. You can see symptoms being reduced. But if the fuel isn't taken care of, you're going to spend the rest of your life putting out fires. I'm going to say something a little controversial, although if anybody's been listening to this podcast for any length of time, I hope you've gotten used to that. Sometimes curing people from their problems might not actually be a good thing. Heavy asterisk here. In most cases, quote unquote, curing someone can be a good thing, right? Like if someone has some deep hatred for themselves, curing, again, heavy quotes, whatever that actually means, curing that person of that severe self-hatred can be a great thing. But let's say someone comes in with extreme anxiety. If I were to cure that anxiety without knowing where it's coming from, I might actually hurt the person or the people around them. You might be asking, well, isn't anxiety a bad thing? No, I said that a little bit earlier. Anxiety can be a great thing. I've made this joke on a previous podcast, and I'll bring it up here again. If someone comes into therapy telling me they have a severe anxiety disorder, which popped up about a year ago, only to find out that they started cheating on their wives about a year ago, you don't have an anxiety disorder. I'm sorry, you're just being an idiot. So if I were to have someone in my office who is actively cheating on their spouse, and I were to cure their anxiety, haven't helped them, certainly haven't helped their wife, and if they have any kids, didn't help them either. So if someone's coming to therapy just to get cured from their problems, just to be functional, might not actually be a good thing. Here's something else I'll say about being functional. Just because you feel better, it does not mean you are more engaged with those around you. So congratulations. Let's say you feel a whole lot better. You feel more stable, more sure of yourself. It doesn't always translate into better connection with others. Let's say, for example, someone goes to therapy to find a cheerleader or a hype man. Wonderful. You now feel better about yourself. But you can actually become so inflated with your sense of self that you become unpalatable to the people around you. Just because you feel so much better doesn't mean that anybody else is actually improved because of it. And that's one of the big things around functioning is, will you feel in a self-report better about yourself? Okay, to some degree, that's great. To some degree, so what? So what you feel better? Does that mean that you can do anything else? Does that mean you're more integrated? If not, I don't know what benefit you've gotten. Because being functional to a lot of people can just be the alleviation of suffering. And what I'll argue for here in a little bit is I think we all need to suffer well. Now, we're all going to suffer, but we need to learn how to do it well. And just because I can bring someone into therapy and gaslight them into positive thinking does not mean that their life is actually better. It doesn't mean that they have more purpose. And it certainly doesn't mean that the people around them actually see improvement. One big thing about therapy that I think is a rightful criticism nowadays is sometimes people can come to therapy to feel more functional. And the way that they do that is use a therapist as a diversion from responsibility. So you show up to therapy. You're there for, 4 or 5 years? What's the usefulness of that? For some people, there's deep-rooted trauma or very severe issues. I'm not going to discount that in the slightest. You should not be coming to therapy for 4 years for general anxiety. You know why some people come to therapy for 4 years for general anxiety? Because it differs from responsibility. You don't have to be honest with yourself. You don't have to be accountable to other people. You can come to therapy to become more functional, quote unquote, when in reality, you haven't done a whole lot. One big reason for that is some people can get just too comfortable in therapy. Now, that might sound a little odd coming from a therapist, but people can come to therapy and become so used to the whole process. If they're not challenged, they tend to stick around even if it doesn't benefit them any. I've told clients multiple times, I've told them, I'm not quite sure why you're here. You keep coming here, and of course, we keep having good conversation, but if you don't feel that, one, I can challenge you more or that there's anything left, I'm not entirely sure what our purpose is to meet. And so one thing that can be a detriment to a lot of clients is they come to therapy and they get more and more functional in therapy, but they don't always translate that out into the real world. So in these reports, in what insurance can claim, this person has become more functional. Yes, as they're answering questionnaires in therapy, they've become more functional. I hope you caught the little bit of sarcasm there at the end of that. The last thing that I'll say about people learning to be functional in therapy is sometimes they can be too numb to function. And for that reason, I think therapy is good. We need to function before we can feel fulfilled, which is coming next. But sometimes people are just so lost that it takes time to just even function. And for those people, I have great empathy, and I would love to sit with them and support them along the way. The trick is you can't sit there forever. You can't be sat with and empathized with forever without actually challenging. So let's move to the second part of this podcast, the part that I think is really the meat of everything and what I actually would argue most therapeutic dynamics are missing. It's to be fulfilled. Let me outline what I mean by being fulfilled. For some people, this is a spiritual or religious understanding that there's a purpose to life. I have a sense of value or meaning. To others, it's a sense of community or family. But fulfillment is something that at the end of the day, I can sleep well. I can get to the end of my life and be able to say that I did as much as I could. I had a sense of purpose. I'm leaving something behind. That's what I mean by fulfillment. Fulfillment also embraces suffering as it leads to positive outcome, either emotionally to the community around you or to a greater idea. Now, fulfillment, the solution to just functioning. This idea of fulfillment obviously requires some level of functioning. You need to be able to think clearly. Even if your life is in shambles, being able to think clearly is required. But fulfillment isn't this understanding that life is great and everything's amazing and you should feel amazing. That's not what fulfillment is. Fulfillment is that sense of purpose, that sense of peace. And so while you do need some level of quote unquote functioning, fulfillment is outside of the immediate circumstances. Some people struggle with fulfillment in times when they're at peace and there's not much going on. Some people struggle with a sense of fulfillment in the midst of chaos. And what's interesting is people on both sides of that aisle, they tend to wonder who in the world the other side is. The idea of fulfillment encompasses the understanding that life holds a variance of experience. There can be good days, there can be bad days. Even when someone functions less optimally, they can still be fulfilled. When they are unable to complete certain tasks because of mental health or something else, they can still feel like there's purpose. Because function doesn't always equate to a sense of purpose in the world. If it were, then someone with mental health issues or physical disabilities or neurological disabilities would be unable to be fulfilled. So fulfillment can be this amorphous idea to some people, but everyone can grasp what it means. I will say something important here. This fulfillment, the sense of purpose, if done correctly, if done in a healthy way, can override your immediate feelings. So for someone who comes to therapy and says, I feel this way, Well, one, do you just feel that or do you identify with that? And two, what do you do with it? Is a feeling something you experience and you notice, or is it something that you put on and wear? Are you ruled by your feelings, or do your feelings just tell you about what's going on inside of you and in the world around you? Being fulfilled, having purpose, is about focusing on what you can do, what can be done to help, who you can help, and what you're a part of. When people describe purpose, it isn't just this, I accomplished X, the end. It's almost always in a relational or spiritual context. This fulfillment, the sense of being able to see the world, to look back and know that you made a difference is fulfillment. Some days people are more functional than others. That doesn't matter. Fulfillment is also a direction in growth instead of just stability. If you think of something like a stock market growth, now, let's just hopefully take it in a general positive way, but you see ups and downs, you see trends, you see when things rise and fall. But hopefully over time, you see a continual growth. That over time, no matter what's going on, you see positive trends. That's what fulfillment looks like a lot of the time. It's not just what can be done, but what direction am I heading? For better or for worse, do I see hope for the future? Being fulfilled is also embracing that life is complicated. Things are hard, but there's also a long term, that there's more to life than just what's happening right now. Maybe I struggle with being functional today, but that doesn't mean it dictates tomorrow. Maybe I'm struggling in this moment to make the right decision, but I can be assured that the decision will be clearer a little bit later. I don't have to do things alone, that there's a purpose. Let me give some personal examples of function and fulfillment. If anybody's gotten through this and is wondering what practically this looks like in their own lives, hopefully I can give some examples. Functioning for me includes being a therapist, writing books, being able to be engaged with my family. It also includes driving and going to sleep and keeping my sanity somewhere along the way. Those are all things that are necessary to function in the world around me. But see, purpose is different. And for me, when I've gained a sense of purpose, then all of the bumps along the way didn't matter as much. One of the big senses of purpose that I hold now and into the future is that whenever I retire, I'm never going to actually retire. And if my wife is listening to this episode, I know she's not shocked, and I love you. And you know that I will never actually retire. But whenever that comes about, I want to be able to look back and say that I did everything I could with what I had. No matter what skill it was, no matter the way that I was able to influence or help other people, that I did the best that I could. I put out everything I could. I gave up the sleep. I gave up the little bits of sanity to be able to help as many people as I could. If I could write a book about something, I did it. If I could take an extra time to sit and be with my wife and my family, I did it. Because when I struggle with mental health, I start to question, well, is this something that's going to just affect me now? Or is this something that I can put in perspective of the future? And so there are some days, there are some weeks when I'm more functional than others. All the bills get paid, everything gets done, all the minimum requirements have been met. But in the level of functioning that I like, the way that I see myself as the most productive, see, that fluctuates over time. Some weeks I'm more motivated than others. Some days I could really use a nap in the middle of the day. But none of that matters if I have a sense of purpose. If I see that there is a real chance that I could get to the end of my life and be at peace. That when I've worked with a client, I've done everything that I could, obviously within reason. I'm not going to be perfect, but knowing that I reasonably was as present as I could be, I thought through things as much as I could. That's what I mean by purpose. that there's a greater sense of calling out there in the world, that it's not just me. For my wife, I want to be able to be the husband that no matter what was able to be there. That's a fulfilling thing for me. How I speak and how present I am and what time I go to bed are functions, but knowing that I've been there for my wife and been loving is what's fulfilling. Being a dad, my goodness, that's a fulfilling thing. I've done right, although there are some days I start to question. Let's think about what you can do with this. To whoever's actually listening to this episode. Some people come to therapy hoping to just have their symptoms lessen or go away. That is a useful goal. That is something that can be done and is admirable, although that cannot be it. If all you have are symptoms, then you're nothing more than a program. But I believe that people, human beings, are much more complicated than that. We have much more to us than just the symptoms or the brain structures. I would encourage you, if you're someone who has felt stalled out in therapy or felt like something was missing, examine whether you were just putting out those fires, if you're just being functional, or if you were actually working toward being fulfilled. I would argue nowadays, there are not very many people that have a sense of fulfillment in their lives. Instead, they seek it in the world around them. They actually sacrifice their functioning towards the idea of being fulfilled. The crazy thing is, you should do that to some degree, but you should do it with a real end goal and not just wondering if fulfillment will come through affirmation or blind support. If you're someone who's never been to therapy or is unsure, I hope what you've heard today, that your sense of growth doesn't just have to be management of symptoms, that you can start asking bigger questions of yourself or what your purpose is. And that can have just as much to do with your growth as does coping skills or family dynamics. Thank you for listening. I hope you got something that would be useful to yourself, to those around you. If you feel the need, you can leave something in the tip jar to help pay for the production of this podcast. Most importantly, though, I hope that you follow this podcast, share it with those around you so that they can find some hope and healing in their lives as well.